Hello. Hello, nice to meet you. My name is Madeleine van Holsen. I'm going to be with you this morning and with our great panelists. And we had this great video as an introduction, so I don't need to frame the discussion. It's about housing, as you've been seeing in these pictures, and social justice, accessibility, communities. That's what we're going to talk about with great people who focus on those questions, coming from very different areas, and I think it's a great panel for that reason. It's going to be very diverse. So I just start with a short introduction of our panelists, and please do correct me if I get something wrong. So on my left, we have Evgeny Rovchuk. Yep. You are a global shaper, sorry, yeah, maybe shaker. Okay. Maybe shaker too. Okay, in Kiev. Yeah. And you co-founded, you're the CEO of a company called DIM 9000, yep, doing property maintenance company. Yep. I guess you'll share your experience and, of course, the situation of your country and your town. So thank you to be here. Moses Ngong, you are in Cleveland. You're also a global shaper. And you are working to build communities in a non-partisan democracy-building entity called Cleveland Votes. Is that correct?
Yes.
Good. Thank you. Anna Claudia Rosbach. You're Executive Director of UN Habitat. That's the United Nations Human Settlement Program, and it's mandated by the UN General Assembly to promote socially and environmentally sustainable towns and cities. And you are economists and have been with 20 years of experience in that field. Thank you for being here. Then Mark Rose, Chair and CEO of Avison Young, a real estate company, 5,000 real estate professionals in 20 countries. And I understand that you were here to give back this morning, so happy also to have your experience from the markets and policies and all those important questions. And Miho Mazereu, associate professor at MIT, the School of Architecture, and you are also head of strategy and equity in that department. Is that correct? Good. And working also on this, leading the Urban Risk Lab. Voilà. So you see how diverse and interesting our panel is. And I would start with a very fundamental question. The first one may be for you, Anna Claudia, if you agree. It's why is housing so important?
Okay, thank you.
Let's go.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. First of all, thank you for the opportunity of being here. My first point is I feel at home here in this event because it's my favorite type of event. So to be together with the community and having this really, really frank, honest discussion about the problems that we face. So I will start with the relevance with housing as a human right. So it's recognized by the United Nations Human Rights Frameworks, so the right to adequate housing. So this is the first layer that I would like to put. Then housing is a very complex intersection, very potential intersection, but also very complex. Social development, economic growth, environment, climate action, but also cities, right? Urban. So if we look at the climate, for example, the building environment or the building industry is responsible for a big part of the emissions, right? But we still need to build houses. We still have people needing houses. So it's very relevant that we build right for the right people and in the right location. Cities, houses is also at the core of the cities. It's one of the key elements, key components. If we look at cities, what's the majority of buildings? It's houses, right? And right now, cities are growing much more in territory than in population, twice at least in territory. So we are eating land. We are eating the environmental surroundings of our cities. This is affecting biodiversity and with lots of consequences also in terms of emissions, because urban sprawl requires transportation and so on, and more infrastructure, fiscal impact for the city, so many negative impacts of that. So we have to make sure that we maximize what we have built and that we think about different ways to live, right? Maybe densification is an option for us to go, because we cannot keep growing in territory or consuming our land the way that we are doing. Social protection, social development. If we don't have a house, if we don't have an address, a young person will not find a job, right? If a mother doesn't have a house where she can leave the children and go to work, she cannot work or go to school or something like that. Housing, if kids don't have a house to go back home and make the homework, they will not stay at school. They will be sick. So it's a critical aspect. So I don't have to tell you, because you know that already, right? And then you have the economic perspective. So for many of us, housing is an asset. And specifically for women, if I think about women in the Global South, having access to a title, to a property, it's very important. It's critical to guarantee autonomy and security for the family and for herself. So many families depend that also for intergenerational transfer of assets. And then you have the inputs in terms of local economic development. A house can be connected to a business and can generate jobs and opportunities. And also housing has been one critical input for the GDPs for many countries, let's say the US or China or even Europe. For many years after the whole recovery after the World War, Brazil recovered from the 2008 crisis through housing. So housing has been an engine of macroeconomic growth. So housing is at the intersection of all that and has a great potential. But the point here, and which also points us to the relevance of housing, is we are living a global housing crisis. Right now, we are experiencing records of affordability gaps. So there's a study from the IMF that was just recently released that's saying, okay, historically, if we look back, I think from 2008, they say, this is the highest gap that we have. So people's income are here and the prices of their houses are here, basically. We also have over 300 million, more or less, estimated living in homeless situation, more than 1 billion people living in slums without water, sanitation, adequate access to social services and to the city. According to our estimatives, we have about 3 billion people living in housing situation that is not so adequate. So this is the picture that we have, great potential, extremely important, fundamental for us as humanity, but big challenges to overcome.
Thank you very much. A great framing of the topic and in impressive numbers, 300 million people without homes and 3 billion not adequate. So maybe before we go to the economic questions, could you tell us, Evgeny, about house security and share your experience in your country? Yes, please.
Yes, sure. First of all, thank you for having me here today. Yeah, and in Ukraine we have this experience of the housing crisis because so many people have to move from different regions from one part of Ukraine, mostly it's eastern part of the southern part of Ukraine, to western or central part. And actually for Ukraine, the main challenge is to provide this house security for these people because we discovered that this feeling of house security is really matter for people in terms of reintegration into new society, into new parts of society in Ukraine. So house security is one of the main parts of actually real estate industry. So that's
And maybe could you tell us a little bit more what you do?
Yeah, sure. I'm actually a CEO and co-founder of a real estate company, and we provide people with maintenance of their property. We are one of the biggest real estate management company in Kyiv, and of course in the whole Europe as well, whole Ukraine, sorry, as well. And also we provide people with heat production in Kyiv. So yeah, we're working on the situation when you have blackouts in Kyiv, and we have to provide people with stable electricity, with stable heat production, and actually adequate circumstances for living in their property during these difficult times.
So maybe one more for you before we go to the other panelists. So how do you work in this war situation? How do you do that to provide energy when there are blackouts? I mean, just give us a few examples of how you do that.
Well, yeah, actually, it's a whole new big area for innovations and experiments, of course, because most of technologies are not able to survive during constant blackouts, which is happen like 3 or 4 times a day, and they get broken, and which is obviously so. In Ukraine, we have to make these experiments to combine, for example, gas stations for heat production with these batteries to provide this stable electricity even for 4 to 6 hours a day, like permanently. So people have the ability to just living in their houses and still using like microwaves, washing machines, just actual lights in their rooms. And yeah, it's and it was our I think biggest success. Actually, we figured out how to combine these generators, some batteries with all of these elevators, gas stations, lights on public areas near your house. So most of people in Kyiv, which are living in houses under our maintenance, can actually live their normal life even during blackouts periods. So yeah.
Thank you. Mark, any comment about this, and how can you relate to this very specific situation related, and tell us about your work, and how do you go around the money issue, because it's about money. Finally, we're all talking about money for this housing crisis.
Money comes into play because of all of the elements of what the built environment and community actually is. And I really applaud the World Economic Forum, because this is the first of our sessions, and when we've been in a couple already this week, that we actually are speaking to the community, and the resolution of all issues around the built environment and cities and communities starts with the community, right? And we'll talk about the public sector, we'll talk about the private sector, we'll talk about the money in the first place, but to have a panel like this, and again, if we're going to be challenged on those two acronyms with the DEI and the ESG, I'm very honored to be with a group of different people who are merit-based up here. So it's very exciting to continue working through the issues that we're facing. And as Ana Claudia said, there's a housing crisis. There's clearly a housing crisis, and it's not that people don't want to help. It's how are we going to do it? And it is complicated because the elements of building and funding, not because I happen to be in the private sector, but private sector typically doesn't invest unless there's a return. People aren't going to give you the money. People aren't going to trust you unless there is a return. The question I think in front of us is, what will that return be, and how will we view it? Is it quantitative and qualitative? And so really to get to the point, we have been in many cities around the world, in the 20 countries that we operate in, plus other countries that we don't have offices in. It's a matter of saying, what can we do to pull together the match of the public sector understanding what they need to do, what the private sector needs to do, how we can come together to make it work, because having the crisis that started with low-income housing that has moved up to workforce housing, in a big way, that what are the elements to success? What are the outcomes and the conclusions? And so if we can start to give recognition, maybe, as a qualitative piece, maybe there are inputs from the public sector, and maybe those things are tax incentives. And again, we have them all throughout the world. They come in different forms, whether they're credits or financings or green, financings. There's still many, many ways to pull together a solution. But this solution comes down to really one basic issue. Are you going to come together to discuss it? Because what we know, for example, every successful project that is built all throughout the world has the elements of understanding that there's financial viability. And that financial viability, if you start off with understanding that private sector will fund and clearly has the know-how to do that, public sector will support, and and we've been in deep conversation about, all kidding aside, the conversations that have been had about the European Union and what President Trump's going to do in the US, we just got too bogged down, in regulation. And we have places, again, all throughout the world where a mayor of a city will bring a permit to you, and there are other ones that you're not going to get anything done for 5 or 6 years. And so the conversations there and what has to happen from the public sector, which could do something as simply as make process efficient, okay? Or it's money, plus it's know-how. Have the dialogue, have the debate, know what you're going to build. And by the way, other things that we've been touching on in WEF, like anti-corruption. When you know that you have a viable project and a viable plan, that sort of roots out some of the bad behavior as well that sometimes we see to build cities and to, and to build communities.
Communities, great to switch to you. So tell us about how you work with communities. And I was going to ask who has to be around the table. Maybe Mark, you can come back to that afterwards. So how do you work on communities, and who are you getting around the table?
Absolutely. Thank you. So happy to be here. Grateful for this opportunity. A couple things that are also in my projects are I'm a community organizer in Cleveland, Ohio, where I'm from. And I work with an initiative at the place where I'm attending social work school called the National Initiative for Mixed Income Communities. And in all of those projects, including Cleveland Votes, we're really focusing on expanding our idea of what success looks like in housing development. I think typically a house being built and someone that didn't have a home having a home is often what we consider the benchmark for success. And that is something to celebrate. It's very hard to get done. But what we're seeing more and more is that, especially if you're developing low-income housing, with people who have been disinvested in for generations, at least in the United States. Giving someone a home to live in often isn't enough to give them a dignified life. There are safety issues, there's tension between their new neighbors. For example, if you're building a low-income housing building, people around that low-income housing building might not be happy to see it in their backyard. And so we're really trying to expand the idea of what success looks like for that. And I think that there are kind of three key pillars to that. One is civic empowerment. It's reaching out to people, building relationships with the communities that are moving into a new house, and trying to get them to build relationships with each other. We really believe in the work that I do that relationships are the foundation of social change. So that might be bringing neighbors together to talk about a safety issue in the community. Instead of relying so much on the police, maybe we're getting neighbors together to do a cleanup or to do block watches, stuff like that. Another huge piece of the work is building institutions for those relationships to develop. So a huge part of the work is a model called Neighbor Nights. That's a really exciting new model where we're bringing people together to talk about issues and kind of connect neighbors across lines of difference. So in that aforementioned community where, let's say, wealthier residents have a new affordable housing development project in their backyard, they often aren't really sharing any community spaces with their new neighbors. For example, maybe they're going to nicer restaurants, maybe the lower income people are going to McDonald's. Maybe they might not go to the same church, they barely really interact with each other. And so creating spaces for those two parts of the community to come together, to get to know each other, to feel like they're really equals instead of antagonists, which might be the dynamic that they arrive into. We're really trying to change the precedent and the norms around diverse socioeconomic, racial communities, especially in the United States.
Thank you. So can I just ask an example? Building up on the one you used with the different environments of people. So what would you do? Like get a party together? How do you get the people together? Honestly.
Yeah, absolutely. So Neighbor Nights are typically once a month, and the way it works is that it's a structure kind of like a secular church a little bit. And how it works is that anyone who comes to the meeting can participate fully equally. So in a block club meeting or an HOA meeting in the United States, number one, it's typically dominated by homeowners, and it's very hierarchical. But often we're seeing communities, as low-income housing develops, they're very diverse socioeconomically. There might be a lot of renters that have an interest in improving the neighborhood. So we've created a space where renters and homeowners are on equal terms, and they might talk about issues affecting the community. They do talk about issues affecting the community. So for example, and this is a real example, let's say that there is a bridge in Cleveland that is kind of like overhanging a street, and debris is falling from that bridge consistently. Occasionally it hits a car, God forbid that it would hit someone on the head. And of course that's a concern for homeowners and it's a concern for renters. So someone at Neighbor Night will raise that as an issue. They'll talk about it with their peers and then hopefully take action to address the issue after the meeting, which is really beautiful. Another really exciting part of Neighbor Nights is the marketplace, and that's really an opportunity for mutual aid and material exchange. My favorite example of a marketplace success was when a lower income resident came to a Neighbor Night and was looking for bikes for her children and other kids on her street. And there was actually a community member there who had more income. And so when she asked for bikes in the marketplace, another community member raised their hand and said, hey, I have some bikes. And that night, that community member was able to walk home with 4 new bikes. And then when I was going for a walk the next week, I saw the kids riding the bikes. It was really heartwarming.
That's such a great example.
Yes, so trying to create relationships where material exchange is happening. And in that instance, it wasn't, hey, come to my charity where you can pick up a bike. And maybe it's not the most dignified experience, maybe it is. But in this instance, it's a peer-to-peer exchange rather than...
And it gets regular, sort of, because you have a regular meeting. And
exactly,
so, okay.
It's a practice.
Okay,
yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Miho, what would you like to say about cities? You've been working a lot on cities, and well, we've had many topics raised, but densification maybe is one that was mentioned, or just jump into another one if you want to.
No, thank you very much. It's amazing being on this panel with you, and thank you all for being here, including friends that I just made on the train coming up here. So there's the house, and then there's the land, and I think a lot of people have been talking about housing, and I think where we build is really important too. And so in many cities, I wouldn't advocate all cities densify. There's some cities that are already at its bursting beyond its peak. But there are many tier 2 and tier 3 cities that I think can have densification, and then we don't go into territories where we shouldn't be building, where we want to protect the nature, or even places that are unsafe. There are a lot of floodplains that people end up building on because they have no choice. And so I think densification is a strategy. And for that, we have to figure out, well, what is the zoning and planning that needs to happen in order for the housing to be built in a safe way? In a lot of cities, it's really only people who have the capital, developers, who can then change. It's a long permitting process, right, to go and change the existing zoning to be able to build denser. But some cities are waking up. I am always an optimist. I know we have a big project on our hands to be able to work on this together, but I am an optimist. And we will see many cities already starting to change their zoning ordinances so that they can have infill. The challenge with this is also the human factor of people who don't want, or NIMBYism, who don't want additional densification within their neighborhood, but I do think that it is a collective human effort in order to make sure that we don't keep extending and increasing those numbers. And I think that the community piece folds into that because the communities in many places have a say in what their zoning ordinances are within their city, and so going and championing for that is a great way for all of you to engage as well.
So thank you. Maybe we could go to policies. Could you give us a few examples, and then maybe Anna Claudia, of public policies or mixed? Because Mark, you were mentioning private-public. So could we raise some nice examples that could be interesting?
Yeah, and I'm thinking, Mark? Oh.
No, go ahead.
As you want. Yeah, Anna Claudia.
We'll jump in.
You start.
Not bashful.
No, I was just thinking about everything that you were saying here. And I think one key aspect, because the challenges are huge, is governance, actually. And you spoke about governance at the different levels, right? So in order to overcome all these challenges, I believe we need to have some sort of agreement at the national level and some sort of agreement at the local level, the city level, and then, of course, the community level. So there are basically 3 levels, but national and local, to agree on certain things. And at the national level, I think one critical bottleneck, and we spoke in the other session, Mark, is first of all, there's no single country in this world that was able to promote housing without incentives and subsidies. So housing is expensive. It's unaffordable for most of the population of the world. In the global south, you can maybe 5–10% of the households would be able to afford houses in markets. Otherwise, no, they're out. So the government must chime in, and they are doing in the United States, billions of incentives in Europe, everywhere. Incentives, subsidies, anything. So this financial arrangement, framework needs to be in place. We have to have the loans, the credits, the institutions, the incentives, the subsidies. So align all that with the legal framework that orients how cities are built. It's a big challenge for me at the national level. So we need to have governance there. One example that I can put on the table, 2 examples. And in Latin America, we have different approaches in terms of planning cities. And I'll come back to that. But 2 examples, Chile, Brazil, they established national coordinations or committees or councils with representation from the private sector, from the social movements, from the academia, professionals, local governments, to agree on major aspects. So one example from Chile, thinking about densification, as they came together and they came out with a policy for balanced densification, which is very interesting because it evaluates the potential for densification in intra-city and inter-cities. And considering that high-rise and densification must be respectful for the environment, for the cultural aspects, for the urban context, and also for the social limitations. And Brazil has also established a council that helped to shape many, many housing policies and so on. But then at the local level, and I'm giving so many examples from Latin America because I am from Latin America. So another example of local governance at the city level, and this is the practice in Latin America changed, I believe, in the last years. So we do have comprehensive master plans in cities. So it's a different approach than the cities in the US, right, where you look at zoning and so on. And city of Bogota, for example, has launched a master plan just 2 years ago that was also agreed. It was based on a social contract. And it has zoning for what they call the care neighborhoods, so neighborhood at the earmarket where people live, where housing should be built, and where equipments to protect women should be there, like laundries and childcare and everything. But also protecting the environment. So in Bogota, 30% of the population lives in 70% of the city. And they cannot go beyond because everything is environmentally protected. So even in a very densified city, you can find empty, vacant spaces and ways, different ways where people can co-house and live together, right? And then agreeing on what is the kind of zoning mechanisms. And to finalize my examples, the city of São Paulo and many cities in Brazil, 80% of the cities in Brazil with population above 20,000 inhabitants, they set up a mechanism called social interest zoning. And this goes for informal settlements, where you earmark informal settlements. And in these areas, there are lots of flexibilities in terms of building codes, in terms of urban codes, to preserve what's there, and also to access titling for the people. And also the earmark empty and underutilized vacant spaces in cities. So in the city of São Paulo, there is an extra property tax if the owner doesn't use that for housing. And there are limitations for market use in this zoning. This is only possible because in the case of Brazil, we have a law called the City Statute and the Constitution that foresees the social function of the land, which, by the way, is stated at the New Urban Agenda, which is the global commitment signed by member states that orients the mandate of UN Habitat.
Thank you very much. Mark, do you have examples to share, given you're in so many different countries? Maybe what are the best examples that could be?
Yeah, I just don't think we have enough time. No, not for you. By the way, we love being on panels with you. No, and my point of this is, we can go for the next few hours on this, is really the point. Every one of these conversations, and to get to the outcomes and the examples that you want, still have to come down to being solutions-based, outcome-based, and intentional. So I want to give hope to Moses. Last year, I was on the YIMBY panel, the Yes in My Backyard. And it exists, right? Los Angeles, conversation around we needed affordable housing, low-income housing, working with the local jurisdiction to give a little more size to the project, right? So more square footage was traded for doing the right things, happening in the context of a conversation about what was needed for the community. This is going to be coming up, just the tragedies of the last couple of weeks, and we have partners who have lost their homes in, Palisades and, in LA. This is an opportunity, which, by the way, the very first conversations about, hey, we'll give you a permit if it's just the same thing that you had, rebuild it right away and you don't need a permit. Oh my goodness, that is the absolute wrong answer, because what you're going to need to use as materials to rebuild, right? We all knew what the possibilities were for that area. And oh, by the way, you can change, if there's a dialogue, who's going to be in there and why, and what you're going to, invest in. So we did do this. Again, Los Angeles there, on the banks of the water in Ohio, we are in the middle of regenerating an old power plant. And again, it is based on opening up the lands, making it quite sustainable and diverse. And it took incentives from the state. Private sector was willing to do this. We all understood that what was on the site, had to be cleaned up. It made all the sense in the world. In, the UK, no knock against London, but the regions work, a whole lot better. We have had a history in our company. We have been the planners of major cities all throughout the UK. And you can, and you do. And we spent a lot of time with the mayors, and we're going to be with them again at MIPIM in March to specifically sit down with the mayors, ask, what do you need? What can you do? What can we deliver for the people? And it leads to great success on the economic side as well, because as I said, it is just a fact. Private capital is not coming in unless it has a return, right? So that's going to be a given. But how do we pull this all together? And so they're all throughout the world. I'll also say we came off a panel, yesterday, please, one size does not fit all. All properties, all subcultures, we talk sometimes as if our way, but the subcultures of the world act very different, very, very differently. And so you have to attack it city by city, and region by region, and town by town, and community by community, and really good things happen. I'm far more optimistic, and I don't think we've made enough in the way of any sort of inroads. And the conversations that we've had, the crisis, the amount of effort, capital, attention that needs to happen to solve the housing crisis in the world, especially as we're expected to grow to 10 billion on this planet. We have to commit to this, right? Otherwise, we have destroyed the social fabric, of the world. And again, this doesn't have to be what people complain about. We're green with this. We're like, no. We need to get people off the streets. We need to reinstall dignity. That you want to go home, you want to feel that you are safe, and you want to feel that you are providing for your families and your communities, and people want to help.
Thank you. Maybe, Evgeny, about the collaboration with the public or authorities. So who do you work with in your different situations? And yes, what can be shared again in terms of innovations you were mentioning, the way to find solutions. So how can you share about what you're doing?
First, actually, as it was mentioned before, there are always three stakeholders in this process in real estate. It's a local community, it's a real estate developer, and it's the governance, it's the city itself. And so you always have to moderate this interest, because sometimes they conflict with each other. In Kyiv, we also have this large heritage from Soviet Union and the Soviet way of zoning the city, like it was about this area just for living, this area for manufacturing, this area just for some other functions. But our experience demonstrates us that it's not the way to be efficient, because you have to mix all these functions, so you can use one area, and you can mix these people who are living in this area and be more efficient in using these square meters that you are building or you are maintaining, just maintaining this real estate buildings. And in Kyiv now we have a huge number of examples when real estate developers are trying to figure it out, the situation when you have some abandoned manufacturing area in the historical area of your city, and you have some some neighbors right there, and you have to create these open discussions about what we are going to do on this area. Like here is the project, we are proposing you to create this, and we need to hear your feedback. Actually, even now, during the full-scale invasion, we have in historical era numerous of these projects when we're trying to make this actually connections between people. And as Moses said, that connections is everything in real estate. Actually, now I'm studying in one real estate school in Kiev, and our lecturer once said us that real estate is all about collaboration. If you, as a person, as a company, are not able to make these connections, partnerships with people around you, real estate maybe is not for you. And it would be really difficult.
So do you have situations that are getting improved? If you I mean, even in Kiev, even with the war, given what you've said about this zoning, so can you share one example of something that's become better?
Yeah, of course. We have this example of public areas that were built by real estate developers, and as usually you have some plan, and in fact it didn't work out, figure it out. So you have to change these projects, and we have public areas where we have the skate park, and people were bothered by skaters actually, because it's very noisy, and people coming home just to relax, and they constantly keep hearing these noises from skate park. So actually it's not finished project yet, because we're still trying to figure out how to deal with this skate park, and of course we're trying to making experiments with the surface of areas around these buildings, so to decrease the noise from people around you, but still keep all the territory open, and just not to get these gates all around your buildings.
Thank you very much. So I'm watching the time, and I would like to give the occasion to somebody or some people in the room to ask questions to our panelists, please. I guess we have microphones. I didn't give you enough time.
That was a very short heads up, yeah. Thank you so much for the very interesting panel and the engagement in the community. I have my background in social and sustainable urban and district development, and I want to come back to you, Moses, and you, Mr. Rose. The combination, the private sector only gets in when there is a return. I absolutely agree, and in the city of Wuppertal, we managed to bring together the public sector, the NGOs, and the investors. And in the end, it turns out that when we have a look at the community itself and bring people together and take care that there's really like mixed communities, you have spaces with like a good rent for the investors, and you have spaces where you have like affordable housing. And there was one instrument that was very interesting that we found. It was called the restaurant day. And the method is as easy as simple. 2 times a year, the neighbors, they open up their houses, their backyards, their garage, and turn it into a restaurant for a day. And they have other people coming over, and they serve them. And there is one thing that we could watch over time. People started greeting each other in the street because they were guests inside of the houses of their neighborhood. So usually you just meet in front of the houses. But something obviously happened once you enter the private space of somebody else. And that created something that I think is the foundation of what the private sector then translates into return. And it was the foundation of trust. And that's exactly what happened. People felt secure in the street and in their homes, and that really translates into return. So I just wanted to contribute to that and say, I think that is exactly the perspective that we together need to agree on. Like, okay, how do we create those environments?
We should switch seats. Well done.
So where was this? Excuse me, I didn't hear where it happened. This restaurant days. Okay.
Germany.
Okay. So do you want to react to that? Moses, you were Poked.
I'm
No.
so excited about it. It's an amazing idea. I do want to connect with you after the session. I think actually it's interesting in some of the work that I'm doing in Cleveland with the National Initiative on Mixed Income Communities. We've seen that the building developers haven't been as eager to partner with us on the community building pieces of the work, which are so essential. And so I think if we could think of a way to, and if it's like a government partnership, it's low-income housing, there's immediately a budget for community building that's indefinite or something like that. I think that it's a tremendous idea, and I think that we should systematize it so that we know anytime that we're building a community, we have a budget to invest in it. I love your idea.
Great, thank you. Another question. Sorry, sir. Here, and then I'll go in front.
Thank you. I want to touch a perspective which I think was not fully covered in the panel. I moved to Switzerland 15 years ago, to Ukraine. And whenever my friends were visiting me, I was bringing them to the cave of my building, showing them this thick concrete walls and doors and saying that, oh, it's a joke, it's like you're an excursion in the bunker. Now we are back in, we're in 2025. It's not a joke any longer. In my home country, if we had such installations, that would really save lots of people. And I'm curious, like now when we have entered the era of the newly elected leaders or self-proclaimed dictators who do not respect any agreements that were made in the past, to which extent we need to consider making our homes, new homes that we're building, safe again? Because for me it was a joke just 15 years ago. And unfortunately now I feel much safer having this in my house, but in the new ones that we are building. So where is it in agenda, if any?
Yes, so who wants to answer that one? Do you want to say something?
Yeah, sure. Actually, there are a really great example in Ukraine we're working like right now, because in Ukraine it's about multifunctional of your real estate. Like, of course, we all hope that we will not have any catastrophic like wars or ecological catastrophe, but we have to be prepared for any situation in the future. And actually, it's not only about Ukraine, it's about countries all around the world, because it's not only about the safety, it's not about the war. It's actually also about changing the population of this area, because today there are more like people, for example, children, but these children will grow up, they will move to another areas, and in this building still will be living, the parents live in. So there are some more space that we can use in different other ways. And actually, I think it's one of the main trends actually in real estate development, when you have to understand how you can use this underground parkings or some storage areas or something like that in future in different scenarios. So yeah, I think multifunctionality of real estate is the answer and is a solution for this case.
Yeah. Yes, please, Mark.
Just, jumping quickly, I think it is being worked on, and I think it is being taken into account, and you're going to see it. For the last 3 years, I've been honored to be part of the CEOs for Ukraine, and we have spoken about, from my side, how do we get in there to scan, do digital twins, are there critical facilities, to 3D print pieces of buildings to get schools and hospitals back up. There's going to be the immediate security, and then there's going to be the replanning of cities that are going to be more than 25 years, right? What happened again, in Los Angeles, this is my point of saying, don't just rebuild what you have, rebuild with safety, right? We have, what's going on in Gaza, in Israel, and everything there. All these things need to be planned out. And I do think that where you have, for example, and this is an acute North American issue, that insurance is going to be driving this, because the cost of insurance is so outrageous if in fact you can get it as you're trying to rebuild. And we were dealt a very serious blow this year, where a hurricane comes up the western coast of Florida. A hurricane was never intended to have the power to make it into Western North Carolina, it was almost an impossibility, you know, in most people's mind. It happened, okay? And through climate change and other issues, I think that where, again, the community is going to talk about this and the public sector is going to work with everybody, there are issues that have to be dealt, and those conversations are happening. So give a little hope.
I was going to ask you, so please jump into this.
I'd love to add on to that, and then also connect some other dots. But so the work we do in the Urban Risk Lab and the new climate project at MIT is looking at extreme weather events specifically. And we've found a gap. So we're doing a lot of work with communities and local governments to prepare, and we want to have, everyone talks about adaptation. We all know that that needs to happen before, but then the resources are limited. And so it's really mainly wealthy communities that have been able to create infrastructure, raise their homes. It's so expensive, all of these efforts. So where we found the gap is planning for recovery. And you know, once something happens, resources do flow. But at that point, you're struggling with chaos, sadness. A lot of things are just falling apart, and that is the very difficult time to think, okay, how are we going to rebuild and how are we going to build back better that everybody talks about? And so we've been working with a number of different cities, helping them plan for this recovery, and a number of small towns don't have the resources to have an emergency manager, and so the town mayor or the public works department is also the emergency manager. So we've been working with them through building a digital platform and workshops to see how we can start in bite-sized chunks planning for this recovery. So if places that are expecting something to happen, when those resources can flow, they can really rebuild their housing in a way that they want their city to be in the future. And then the places where we're not expecting it, that's where it's a harder lift to really convince them to start planning for this now.
Thank you. I know there's some more questions. There was, sir, over there. You raised your hand before. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. I'm Elvis Ndikum from Cameroon, but I'm currently in Martin Luther University in Halle, where I'm doing my PhD in global health. So I'm very interested in this topic, which really I take into consideration that we are from different continents and the world is really different. But I have a question which goes for UN, for the United Nations, in terms of UN habitat and looking at housing. When we look at climate change, which is something which is very important at the moment with extreme weather events, do we have a global plan for housing, which does not only take into consideration the fact that in Europe we might have so much snow and in Africa so much sun, and looking at the kind of mechanism where in-country and communities can build so that they are not only adapting or preparing for climate change, but with the poor status or poverty or extreme wealth status, because the growth of populations are different. I know in Africa, the population is growing so rapidly. Meanwhile, in Europe, it's not the same thing. The economic balance is not the same level. So do we have like a global plan that take into consideration the limits of how severe people can not have the means to build their own homes in some countries which don't really have it? Because problems are just everywhere, but the severity is not the same in some areas. So I don't know if there is a global plan or strategy that can take into consideration and make a balance where you don't bring all solutions at once, but try to curb the burden at one level. Thank you.
Easy question.
Yeah, very good, because I don't know, is this my last time to come? Because then I can, or we will have time to continue.
We still have time.
So, because we didn't speak about the global governance, right? So I spoke about the national and the local, and I didn't speak about the global governance. So maybe it's a good entry point for us.
Good.
So yeah, Africa indeed, 50 cities are 50 to 80% informal in terms of land and labor. So it's a situation very difficult, right? People don't have jobs, they cannot pay a house. And there are many fiscal constraints at the national level and also at the city level, capacity and so on. And unfortunately, yeah, cities in the global south, especially those living in informal settlements in slums, they have been disproportionately affected by everything that's happening, right? There's the climate events, but also the conflicts. So the number of internal displaced populations in Africa, look at Sudan, the crisis right now, it's huge, right? So it's just amounting more and more to our needs. But where are we right now at UN Habitat? So I took this position 6 months ago, and it's in my hands. We are working on the new strategy for UN Habitat. So the new strategy will be for the period 26-29. And we created, it was created by the UN Habitat Assembly. We have our own assembly, like you have the General Assembly. UN Habitat has its own assembly. So this is our main governance body. And it was created by the assembly, which are all member states, a resolution on access to adequate housing and transformation of slums. So the plan is based pretty much on these two resolutions. They created an open-ended working group on housing. We had our first meeting in December last year in Nairobi. So we have now this open-ended working group. Member states are there. The co-chairs right now are France and Kenya. And we have tasks. We have to come with norms, standards. We have to create a platform. If you Google it, the resolution is there, and then you'll see the outputs that are expected from this group. So this is work in progress. And what we are suggesting for the strategy is that UN Habitat focus its work in the next period on access to housing, land, and basic services and slum transformations to all. Because right now, if you look at the current strategic plan, it's really wide, right? It goes air quality, transportation, waste management, and so on. We're not discarding all that. They are all critical components of sustainable urbanization, but we are proposing to member states that we focus on access to housing because of the global housing crisis. And understanding that from our focus, we can liaise with the UN constellation to have impact in some areas, 3 main areas. Humanitarian, and here we have all the crises or the conflicts that we are facing, climate change, but also poverty, overcoming poverty and promoting development. There are many other agencies that are working in these fields, all the humanitarian agencies, the climate organizations, the World Bank, and so on. But we believe that we are the ones who can focus on the crisis and try to nurture this global governance. One key aspect of, and then we'll come with regional strategies. And right now we have, we are organized in regions, Latin American, Caribbean, African, Arab states, and Asia and Pacific. Of course, we have presence in Europe and North America, but this, in the Global South, is where we have the projects and the programs ongoing. And a critical element of the governance is an event that happens every second year called the World Urban Forum. I would like to invite you all to that, because it was created 20 years ago during the mandate of Kofi Annan. It was a proposition for member states. Why? Because at this point in time, UN Habitat was elevated. It used to be a small program. It was elevated. And the governing body of UN Habitat used to meet every second year. Right now, the Assembly meets every 4 years. So, and this forum was created to be the instrument where stakeholders could contribute and have incidence into the governance of UN Habitat. It lost a little bit this original purpose throughout the 20 years. It became a big conference. The last edition was in Cairo, Egypt, now in November. We had 25,000 people participating in person. It's the second largest conference within the UN, but I really would like to repurpose that. And I really would like to invite you, because there we have spaces for the private sector, for the social organization, different spaces in the format. We can also review the format together. But this is a space where everybody comes together the local and regional governments, the national authorities. We had in Cairo 120 national authorities between ministers and vice ministers. We had hundreds of local and regional governments present. The private sector was not so present. This is a big task that I would like to have and to fulfill. So this is an invitation to occupy this space, which is the global governance for the sector. Yeah.
So you get invited to another place.
Yeah.
Some more questions. This sir here first, before, and then I see you. Then.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this panel. I'm Tilman Prinz. I'm the Secretary General of the Federal Chamber of German Architects. We've been part of the World Urban Forum for years, and thank you for saying you want to go back to the purpose, because we also felt it definitely lost track a little bit, but all more power to you to reinvigorate that great forum. What I want to say, we know a lot about why we have this crisis, because people use more space than they used to do. In the 70s, they used 1/3, basically, in the developed world of what we use now. We knew also that there's a lot of people who use it differently. We know that young families live in the cities with children. They need little homes. And people whose children moved out in those homes would love to live in the cities. So we have a program in Germany, Young Buys Old. So they switch basically apartments on that. So there are a lot of ideas. What I'm missing is what we call a register of potentials, to have a mapping of where can we build these communities and what is needed in which place. We talked about this week a lot about AI and digitalization and all of that. And the German government tried to start that, but I think it needs to scale up on a European or even global level to have, as I said, a register of potentials to know where we can intensify the cities. I mean, Barcelona, Paris are super intense, and everybody loves to visit them, of course, so it's a good thing very often. Yes, noise, neighbors, gets closer, that's another problem. But to address all of that and to give a guideline on how you can save space building outside the cities, build in the city, and how to use that potential that is there and identify the pros and the cons of building there. So it would be great if you can get together with the real estate industry. We're at BIPEM as well, with a big stand, of course. We need the companies, we need the real estate industry, but we also need the governments, of course, and to have a consensus effort to address this problem, because it's still very fragmented all the time. Very great ideas, but very fragmented, and I think we need to have a more consensus effort. Do you see any chance for that?
I would love that to happen.
So register of potentials, you mean on the more global level? Who wants to comment that? Mark?
Yeah, I'll just go quickly. So we have we're in 5 or 6 cities in Germany. So basic building blocks. You have to have folks who want this information. The data, because again, just talking across the globe, data is really good in some places and non-existent in others. And I'll go back to the intentionality, and I think this is going to lead right into what you do. We do this all the time. But somebody has to want it, somebody has to fund it, and then we have to get the data. And that data can come quick in some areas and take a longer time in others.
So I love what you're saying, both for your reasons, but also for safety reasons of where not to build, and thinking about that 10, 15, 20, 50 years in advance. And so I would like for us to connect to actually work on this. At MIT, it's hard to avoid technology and AI, and so I think that there is something through a partnership that we can really work on this.
Great. Yeah. So another invitation.
Yes, so sorry, can I just propose
yes,
that
please.
You organize a session for the next World Urban Forum on that, 26.
Yeah.
Okay, the surface over there. Okay, there's another person afterwards many people. So let's try and maybe make them shorter so that we can get all the questions. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm from Nigeria, and I have a question regarding the fact that I believe we have a lot of money, unlike what it looks like to do some of these projects. However, this money is just concentrated in probably 1 or 2 cities in Nigeria, like Lagos. I mean, just recently, because we are known for oil and gas, but the government just announced that the real estate sector actually surpassed the oil and gas recently. So, and in Lagos, we have big estates just popping up everywhere. However, we still have the same crisis in other parts of the state. So my question, I think it's going to Rose, as a private sector, I understand like they want to make the money, and I believe they also have solutions. So how can, because I'm also into real estate, I mean, just starting in Nigeria, but I have more interest in places outside these big cities like Lagos or Abuja. So, because that's where the rate crisis is, because now in the big cities, we just have this artificial demand or scarcity, let me put it that way, and then the price keeps going up. So how can the private sector come into other cities and still bring in the money, do the investments, and still make the money? So that's the question.
So I'm just going to reiterate, the knowledge of financial viability of any investment is critical in that planning phase. And there are conversations all throughout the world because the need is all throughout the world. And there's so much just so much capital and just so much kind of intention. And we have to focus on helping and working and investing, whether it's in Nigeria or whether it's a part of a city that might be, in North America that is underinvested. All these things must happen. But there's the building blocks of, okay, is it financially viable? Again, we do have, and this is all throughout the world, safety and security of getting in there to build, because we do deal with that all throughout the world. I'm making this global. Corruption issues, all throughout the world. Supply chain, what are the right costs? It's all possible. And it still comes back to, okay, do we have a plan? Can we execute on that plan? And the private sector will come every time. Every time.
Thank you. So let's just take the last question very short, and then, because we have just a few minutes, we'll just take 2 questions there. Yes, please. And we'll answer them together.
Hi, my name is Krishna. I live in US, grew up in India. I work with US-India partnership in Track 2. A lot of times when we talk about affordable housing and all these concepts, it's technically backward looking a little bit, because you talk about existing communities, existing cities, and more established stuff, and you try to identify the problems. But especially Global South, the world is moving on. There are so many of redevelopment, new development projects coming up. Like when you walk through all the country pavilions here, right? Like they always talk about smart cities, new cities. One aspect which you will see missing glaringly in all these new development projects is the concept of affordable housing, and it actually applies to Global South too. If you take any major cities in the Global South, the housing is not affordable anymore, especially when it is concentrated around technology establishments. So I think collectively we should, maybe one of you can answer, are we thinking in the direction of, if someone is building a smart AI city in Middle East or Sri Lanka, India, like even the Indian Ocean, like the Southern Australia, Tasmania, like are we thinking about what portion of that is about affordable housing? Because young professionals too, not just marginalized communities, cannot afford housing in these good new establishments anymore. You can take New Jersey as an example, or you can take Colombo as an example. It's the same across, and it's gonna the gap between affordability and what is there in the market is going to widen and widen. And if we have to forward look for like 15, 20 years and solve it now.
Thank you. I think it will be the last one because we have just a few minutes left, and maybe I'll invite our different panelists to use this last question that comes back to the affordability to sort of give your last important points, and then we can conclude. So who wants to, just very short, because we have to stop at 45. Who wants to give a few elements about affordability and how are you thinking, let's say for the next 12 months, what is your main focus in your work around this topic? Do you start?
Yeah,
Great,
I would
thank
say
you.
just actually one. So it's of course there is a big gap between this middle level of people and affordable people who need affordable house, but it's also about the balance between the price of this real estate and the cost of maintaining. And you always have to look for this balance, because you also in some cases, and I saw it in Ukraine actually, that you can buy some affordable house and you will spend a lot of money on maintaining it even in 1 year or less, because it was not the best solutions and it was not the most effective solutions. So of course there is a big problem in this gap, but also we need to find this balance.
The balance.
Yeah.
Thank you. Moses?
Yeah, absolutely. It's an important question, and I think for me, it's a mix of political will to actually build systems to make affordable housing consistent and accessible, and then thinking about the United States context, especially if you're thinking about new affordable housing development, and likely meaning that people were displaced from another place of housing to get there. We really need to think about the systems we build to welcome them into their new community, and making sure that affordable housing doesn't just mean a new home, but it means better life outcomes. And housing is one part of that, but Restaurant Day or other community institutions need to be an equally important piece of it.
Thank you. Anna Claudia?
Yeah, we're doing a lot of things in terms of affordable housing, but maybe two pieces. Land. Land is critical. I spoke before about subsidies and incentives. But in addition to that, land is critical because land is the most expensive input of housing in most places. So we really need to have more regulations to try to expand the supply of land for affordable housing. There's examples that we mentioned, Bogota, São Paulo, but also the US has inclusionary zoning. So think how we can leverage and maximize that and connect with the finance that is available, so that we really make sure that incentives and subsidies are aligned with the urban regulations and they land well in the city to the right people. For me, this is a huge bottleneck.
Thank you. Mark?
Just very quickly, I think I'm going to come at this from, from a different, a slightly different perspective, which is right now, be a little dramatic. We're closer to a grade of F than A, on dealing with this issue. We know what it is. We've diagnosed it. We're not doing everything we can. Usually the hardest part is to diagnose it, and we're there. You have to have the will not just to come to Davos and talk about these things, and we do, and it's awesome. When you get energized. But these are conversations that need to continue every day in every one of our communities. There needs to be an understanding, for example, in some of the larger developed cities, that the last 4 years, from COVID to the lack of financing, inflation, and issues with supply chains, that it has resulted in a huge affordability issue. And again, for those that you're looking to build, there has to be profit on top of it, which has exacerbated the situation. This needs, something that we discussed a couple of days ago. It needs to be addressed. It needs to be addressed in your community and at every level of government, because very few times have you met a crisis that we haven't been able to get everybody kind of rolling, and we're just not there with this. So more dialogue, not just here.
Thank you.
We're over time. I agree with everything that everybody says. Maybe just one very different take, which we haven't had a chance to discuss, is the cost of materials and developing better materials, more insulative materials going forward. And so we also invite others to partner with us on that.
And affordable.
Well, affordable is the main thing. And yeah.
Thank you so much. It's hard to stop, but you've been talking of crisis, but we've also had great ideas, solutions, and also invitations, invitations to collaborate and go and talking together outside Davos. So I will stop on that. So thank you very much. Thank you for your great questions also, and have a nice day.